What's good? What's good? What's good? Welcome back, everybody, to episode 2 of Unnamed. I'm making sure I say the name because my co host here, Fowler, doesn't like the name of this podcast, and I have been arguing with him for the past 5 minutes that it's a great name. So, if you guys don't like the name of the podcast, you can just put in the comments below a better name, since my friend Fowler here has failed to come up with a good one and one that seems
Allow
exciting.
me to introduce myself.
I
Allow
didn't.
me to introduce myself past all these lies. I am the aesthetically conscious member of the podcast, Fowler,
You're currently wearing a bathrobe
coming at you
and a
live
pair of headphones. So I don't know what you're talking
because I know
about
how to
saying
do
you're
things in
aesthetic.
style.
All right, Emperor
Because
Palpatine
I
with
know how
your
to do
fucking
things
black
in
robe.
style. Hugh Hefner had style too, and he also wore a bathrobe all over the place.
Hefner,
So
I'm
I'm in good company.
fairly certain Hugh Hefner assaulted many women. So I don't know if that's the person you want to compare yourself to right now. Uh,
True. This is the darker timeline. Normally, we'd be able to laugh at a
yeah, you're
man
on.
who wears a bathrobe professionally, but
Yeah, Fowler's on his dark arc, guys. He's just his like Sasuke Uchiha like arc. Anyway, we have to talk about like real stuff, politics. Uh, which is what this podcast series is about. It's about politics, history, and really anything else that comes into our psychotic little minds while we're sitting here at 10:30 at night. I'm kind of tired, so if I sound a little under the weather or just, not energetic, it's just because I'm tired. I went out for Korean barbecue this afternoon. It was delicious. It was really, really good. So I am full of various meats, various spices, and I am
let's stop
ready to
talking about
record.
all the meat in you and let's move to the podcast.
No, I want to talk about the meat in me for a little bit. You can sit down, all right, and listen. Anyway, I had the bulgogi steak. I'm kidding. We can move on to politics. um, Fowler, do you want to go ahead and start off? Since you came up with the two topics we're talking about today.
Sure. The Dominion lawsuit, if people don't know, has been settled for I believe $787.5 million
It's a lot of money.
from the 1.5 billion. Yeah, it's a shit ton of money, and this is not the end. Smartmatic is still suing for even more money, but it's quite a lot. And if the Smartmatic lawsuit and the Dominion lawsuit together, if Smartmatic sues for the full amount, um, they're looking at like more than a quarter of Fox News's liquid assets basically evaporating in
And
2023.
And to give you all some backstory, for those of you who haven't been following, Dominion, the company Dominion, that is the voting machine company that Fox News slandered uh, during the 2020 election cycle. They were the company that I believe Rudy Giuliani and others referenced as orchestrating, or at least helping orchestrate, uh, the quote unquote voter fraud that occurred during the 2020 election. And Smartmatic is the software that is used, um, I believe, that Dominion uses. So Smartmatic, that is the software. Dominion is the actual physical voting machines, I believe. And Dominion sued first a couple months ago for slander, and Smartmatic sued a couple weeks ago because Smartmatic was also involved. And so that's kind of, for those of you who haven't been following, that's the backstory. If you guys remember way, way back in 2020, um, when members of the Trump administration were, to put it lightly, going sicko mode, uh, those were the companies that were referenced as contributing to what the Trump administration said was voter fraud. So just rounding it.
Most of the news is talking about the fact that we know from the Dominion lawsuit that all the Fox hosts knew they were lying when they talked about the election. That's interesting, but unsurprising. The part that I think is interesting that I want to talk about is that a lot of people at Fox were afraid to basically tell their viewers the truth. They basically didn't think they had control over the narrative, and they assumed that if they challenged the challenges to the legitimacy of the election, if they challenged the voting machines stealing the votes, if they did that, then they would just be they would lose audience. So that really brings into the very interesting question of who controls the political narrative in a country. Is it the politicians? Is it the media? Because you would think Fox News, given how powerful it is and omnipresent it is, you would think that they would be one of the people with a firmer hand on the lever of power. But for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, I believe some of the text revealed that um oh, just to give a clearer view, Smartmatic is the uh Smartmatic is also a voting machine company. Just to give some more clarification there. They're also a voting machine company. Um, but yeah, it's the interesting thing about this case, and the Dominion lawsuit has been settled. The Smartmatic lawsuit has not been settled, and I think, Fowler, from what you told me, there's some indication that Smartmatic does not plan on settling. That they plan on taking Fox News to court, um, which would be fascinating if it
Yeah,
does happen.
there was a tweet, I think they said, where they or statement where they said, like, Dominion settled, but we're gonna finish, or something like that. Like, they implied they were gonna go all the way. That could be a hard bargaining negotiating tactic, but I'm hoping it will lead to um an actual trial where people have to actually testify.
hmm And I think this is going to be a growing trend that we start to see as political polarization becomes more rampant. Is media companies being afraid um, of their audiences and not being able to control their audiences and radicalizing their audiences. And I think this is, the more radical you get, the farther left or the farther right you get, the harder it is to control your base. And I think that, and I'm curious to know your opinion on this, Fowler. Um, do you think with the Fox News situation that it was a case of the audience controlling the media company or the media company controlling the audience?
Well, that's the $1 million question. Who really is in control? Is it the politicians? Is it the media? Is it the audience? And I think it depends on the time and the place. But clearly, um, it remains to be seen whether Fox News really controlled the narrative at any point. But they lost control at some point, and it makes me curious whether when they brought on conspiracy theorists like Len Beck and Tucker Carlson, whether they knew the risk they were taking when they did it, or whether they were completely in the dark. Because um, it's not completely unprecedented. There are figures like Father Coughlin for the radio in the 1930s, but it's been a long time, I think, since a full blown megalomaniacal conspiracy theorist has been allowed to just be the top like news pundit.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately with media companies, and perhaps this was the case with Fox News, as it is with many, many media companies, you know, in a weird way, people don't like normalcy. They like crazy people. They like, you know, look at the types of videos that get the most views. It's always the most controversial, you know, figures. The saying, any, or was it, no media attention is bad media attention. And so I would imagine in the case of Fox, it could possibly be, and I'm not sure about this, that, they realize that every time they bring on these crazy conspiracy theorists, that their ratings go up and the little cha-ching cha-ching money sounds in the pockets of the executives and the pundits, but they weren't careful enough to, even if they were neutral about the situation, they weren't careful enough about realizing the danger in peddling conspiracies. Um,
Conspiracies are, I think, a really, even like in terms of radical rhetoric, they are one of the most dangerous to go down because conspiracies um, can be endlessly unraveled. Everything can be a conspiracy, and everything around that conspiracy can be a conspiracy. And I think it's a sort of anti-intellectualism that lends to people going deeper down the rabbit hole. You know, Introducing small conspiracies makes it easier and easier to view everything else as a conspiracy.
yeah, and most conspiracies don't have a national platform with millions and millions of Americans viewing them, for all the crazy shit most people believe. I would imagine most people's conspiracies are not blasted across mainstream media 24/7. Um, which is what makes media so dangerous and what makes Fox News so dangerous, and what they did so dangerous. So the lawsuit, you know, Dominion has settled, Smartmatic has not. What do you think the repercussions are going to be of this? Because I think that's what I'm curious about. If this is going to cause sort of ripple effects across the media world.
I think it depends on how much money they lose. If they can, if they make enough of a profit in spite of the lawsuits will just become a part of business as usual, where they'll be like, well, we're going to lose this money, but it doesn't matter because we're making so much more money anyway that in the end it benefits us. But if they get sued for, if Smartmatic doesn't settle and they get sued for like 4 billion, $3 billion, um, it may force them to back down. It may force them to be like, well, we will peddle conspiracies, we will lie, but not to such an extent, you know, because um, it's just not profitable for us. But I think again, like that really depends on the lawsuits. But with the Alex Jones case and this one too, I think there's more and more of a precedent that certain media figures that would be protected in an earlier era can be sued and they can lose.
Hmm. And do you view that as a positive or a negative? Because I know that, you know, freedom of the press and the rights of journalists and people in media are really important. And so I'm curious as to what you think will, I'm curious as to just how far reaching the potential of this lawsuit will be, um, and whether or not we're going to see, in the future, the ability for someone to sue um, for you know, deliberate falsehoods that are spread by media companies. And, you know, perhaps it's perhaps it's being in the position that I'm in and not being a media figure, so I can really say like I think it's good that you can sue media figures, but I view it pretty positively because I do think if you are deliberately spreading falsehoods and you are deliberately spreading falsehoods, um, that you should be reprimanded for it, but at the same time, you know,
My
or
understanding of the law is that like the problem with the press to some degree is they're the fourth estate and there are no checks and balances against them, unlike other branches of government where they're given awesome power but with regulations to keep them in check. The media isn't like that, and I don't think, I think the Trump era has really proven that our democracy can't survive mainstream pundits being able to just lie about reality. I think it sets a really dangerous precedent. So I think that there I think that that regulation is necessary, and a lot of media companies are going to be afraid of it. But I think it's a lot about them being held accountable for once.
yeah, so this will be the checks and balances for media, hopefully. Um, maybe it'll cause things to simmer down for a bit. Um, we started planning this podcast before the Dominion lawsuit had been settled. We were going to talk about it, last week, and then I think they settled sometime, this week, or this past week. And so, and then of course the Smartmatic lawsuit is still occurring. So it's definitely something we're going to keep following. Um, the drama between, the pundits and all that itself is not very interesting. What's interesting is the potential long-term effects of this, and how it changes and affects the narratives, um, of media that are so important to, politics.
The media is in a lot of ways more powerful than it's ever been. It's more omnipresent than it's ever been, but it's also more fragmented. The media has less of a reach, but there's more bubbles. And I think that if there is any effect of the Dominion lawsuit, it will be behind the scenes within Fox as a company. I don't expect this to in any way affect Fox viewers. They don't know about the lawsuit because it's not being covered by Fox. And even if they knew, I would imagine they would chalk it up to fake news.
Fake news or the Democrats. Joe Biden. That's what they would probably chalk it up to. Um, you know. So it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens. I don't really expect there to be um I expect the changes, like Fowler said, to be behind the scenes, and maybe, like ripples in a pond, just very subtle. Um so definitely gonna keep up with this case. Um and we're gonna move on to what's gonna probably be the main section of this podcast, which is um the interesting situation that's going on in the state of Florida right now, uh, with a Meatball Ron.
Trump's no longer going by that name,
Uh,
despite it being the best name that
oh,
he had for
he's what?
DeSantis.
What's the new name?
I don't know actually. I just know that he said in rallies that Meatball Ron you know, he's disavowing it.
Uh, yeah. One thing I will say, Trump is the king of shit posters. Uh, if you try to go up against him in a shit posting contest, it's like a coughing baby versus a fucking hydrogen bomb. There's just no way. It's it's brutal, you know. I wish the
Yeah, there are definitely figures in history who could have fought him, but in the pussified modern America, there is no Republican who could stand up against him, you know,
there's not.
accusing his political enemies of being pedophiles and criminals and
We need
communists.
we need a good Democrat shit poster. Okay, I don't even like the Democratic Party that much, but we need a good, like, fuck
I
respect.
mean, Joe Biden called one of his voters fat at a
But
campaign rally. I would say that's
that's.
pretty metal.
I mean, it is, but at the same time, but nah, Joe, Joe's too nice. He's too nice of a person, I think, to be like brutal. Um, but Florida, Meatball Ron and his posse, they've been I guess they've been de-woking the state. I don't even know what the word woke means anymore. They've been trying to, I guess, de-wokify the state of Florida. Um, and in doing so, they've tapped into a moral panic that doesn't really exist. So tell us more about that, Fowler, because you wrote up the notes for this section, and I want you to explain to the people uh, what's going on.
So I think for a populist sort of figure movement to really blossom, there always has to be a crisis that some conspiracy of elites have done against the people. But I think the interesting thing is that there are times when the conspiracy is quite real, and there are times when the conspiracy is not. And even in times where the conspiracy isn't real, um, a populist movement can grow fangs and really become powerful. And I think two examples of that off the top of my head that I think are like that is the prohibition movement, which talked about like the evil big liquor that was, soiling the minds of the people and turning husbands into bad fathers. And they framed the liquor trade as not just being bad for America's health, but being like a real conspiracy of powerful fat cats deliberately getting the people drunk so they could, control them. And the other one is the McCarthy uh, Red Scare in the 50s of basically making up that the communists are taking over the government, making up that they're in Hollywood, making up this crisis that just frankly didn't exist. And I think the wokeism is really another example of this in a modern sense of like the manufacturing of a not just a non-existent controversy, but a non-existent conspiracy of powerful insidious forces manipulating the minds of the people when it's not really real, you know?
Yeah, and moral panics have always existed throughout history, and Fowler gave some good examples. Um, I mean, I haven't too carefully. It's almost like it's too much when I look at what's going on in Florida. You know, the the whole banning AP African American history because it had certain figures in it that they didn't approve of, even though AP classes are elective. You don't, you choose to take an AP class. Most people don't take AP classes. It's um, a minority of people in school take AP classes, and you choose which ones you want to take. Um, and so it, the usefulness of moral panics from a political perspective, whether or not they're effective, I think is heavily dependent upon context. And I think, I've read a couple polls that the woke stuff isn't really working. Like the moral panic surrounding wokeness isn't really having the effect that the right and Ron DeSantis, um, you know, thought that it would. And I think it's because the term woke is so broad. I think the broadness of the conspiracy and the broadness of the word woke, um, nobody really knows what it means. I think, you know, during the Red Scare and during, the McCarthy era, it was a very concentrated conspiracy that was used to take out a very specific group of people. And I think where DeSantis is, fucking up and where the Republican Party's fucking up with the woke stuff is they can't even define what woke means. Nobody knows what woke means. Wokeness could be to them having a slightly tan, curly haired person in a Star Wars movie. Star Wars. I'm sorry, I'm very tired. Uh, um, it could just be having a black person in a Star Wars movie, or having having first graders read Angela Davis, which nobody's doing, but that's what they say is happening. It's the broadness of the term almost renders it ineffective when it's used so much. And I think that's, if we're talking about moral panics from a political strategic perspective, that's I think where the woke stuff isn't working. Um, what do you think about that,
You need the
Fowler?
conspiracy to be you need the conspiracy, I think you're right, to be broad enough that it can exist everywhere. But you do need it to have teeth. You need to have examples of it um being tangible in a way that makes people afraid. And I think you're right. Like the problem of wokeness is, at least with McCarthy and the communists, like the threat of the communists taking over the government is a real tangible threat in a way that like first graders reading Angela Davis really isn't.
Yeah,
Um,
and
I think it's really interesting that DeSantis has chosen wokeism versus like Trump's border and Trump's like, you know, migrants and immigrants, because it's shifting rhetorically away from scaremongering about a people to more scaremongering about a very weird kind of ideology.
Well, in a weird ideology that nobody understands. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
and I think that that's where it falls flat. Um, I think in a weird way, the moral panic surrounding like gender ideology is more more of a tangible threat than wokeness, even though the debate surrounding gender ideology encompasses wokeness, just like the debate around CRT encompasses wokeness as well. And so I think what they did is they basically just mashed all those things together and called it woke. Um,
Wokeness is basically multiculturalism personified, I think. It's just fear of
anything
difference and
difference,
fear of diversity.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so it's and I definitely think I think its effectiveness is dependent entirely upon the fact that we're currently going through a very difficult economic time, and a lot of people are very insecure. A lot of Americans are very insecure about their place in the world. Um, as the world becomes more globalized and interconnected. Um,
The
and
Republican Party is fed on racial resentment since the Southern Strategy began in like the 60s or the 70s. But I think wokeness is a mutation of racial resentment to make racial resentment, instead of being a people, to being an
yeah,
ideology.
well, and I wouldn't just say
And
racial resentment. I would say racial resentment, and then resentment towards LGBTQ individuals as well. I would say
oh yeah,
it's
definitely.
an unholy spawn of like racial bigotry and then just anti LGBTQ sentiments all kind of mashed together. And also misogyny as well, I would say. Although they,
All the bigotries.
yeah. Um, so in a weird way, it's almost like the culmination of centuries of American bigotry. So it doesn't surprise me that it's effective. Um,
I think there's a possibility. The Southern Strategy was about like you couldn't say the N word anymore overtly, and you couldn't overtly attack black people. So you attack the poor, you attack welfare, you attack things that are related to blackness but are not overtly blackness. And I think in maybe wokeness is that it's the softening of the MAGA Trump era
yeah,
rhetoric of we're not going to be explicitly hateful to different ethnic groups. We're going to attack them as an abstract ideology instead. And we're going after these people, but we're not gonna say the N-word overtly. We're not gonna overtly call Mexicans rapists and drug dealers. We're gonna talk about, an amorphous ideology that will happen to be brown and will happen to be gay, but on paper is kosher.
yeah. What's interesting to me about the woke stuff, and I think this is possibly also where DeSantis went wrong, is he's kind of become the spearheader of the Stop Woke movement. Um, and there doesn't seem to be across the southern states or across really just any Republican states a sort of unified consensus. You know what I mean? Like the state that I'm in, not going to dox myself, but my governor is not using the Ron DeSantis playbook. Let's just say, um, and I am in a red state. I'm not in a blue state. Um, and so it's interesting that that strategy has sort of confined itself to Florida and hasn't really spread to other states. Although other states are passing, uh, legislation that targets trans people, or that's directed towards trans people, but it doesn't seem to be part of this like overall DeSantis, stop woke movement.
it's hard to tell in this media landscape how much of that is they're not anti-woke and how much of it is they're not anti-woke overtly
Well,
in
they're
the very
also,
performative way that Ron DeSantis is woke. You know,
well,
like
I
he
will
gives
say,
these massive press conferences.
oh, I was going to say, I will say, just to add, that also could be because Ron DeSantis is going to run for president and the other governors are not. So,
Yeah, I can't tell how much of it is a media thing. Ron DeSantis is definitely the person who's leaned into it more, but I think there is anti-wokeness stuff happening. It's just he's made that his issue in a way that others are not.
which is embarrassing because he could be doing literally any other thing, but to each their own, I guess. Uh,
One of the problems with supporting like a power structure, like the conservatives I think have this problem often in our era. Like they don't actually want to challenge the powerful. They don't want to go after the wealthy or corporations or any of that. They don't want to really fix the system that's corrupt and rigged. So they have to create scapegoats. Like Ron DeSantis can't really challenge power because he's a slave to power. So he needs to
Something
pick a
else.
stupid bullshit issue. Yeah, so that he can direct power in a way that's not going to damage the powers that be.
Yeah. Not actually trying to fix the real problems. I think the most damning thing I read about DeSantis, uh, and I haven't shared this with you, Fowler, but there was a article that I read a while ago that talked about how DeSantis has repeatedly denied the existence of climate change, but he has been
Hmm.
very covertly. Uh, I don't know if it's that he is preparing real estate um, agencies and insurance agencies for the fact that a huge chunk of the Florida coastline is going to be gone, and
Hmm.
he's been sending resources to coastal Florida communities to prepare them for the fact that they're going to lose their homes. Which is such a ghoulish thing to me because that shows that he's aware of the damage that is going to happen due to climate change, but publicly will deny its existence.
In the era that we live in, we have the fortune of knowing that most of the political enemies that we have don't believe any of it. We know that the Fox News people don't believe any of it. We know Donald Trump doesn't believe anything about the Great Lie. And we know with Ron DeSantis that he's also totally full of shit. And I think that's really unique. Not only that we know that they don't believe it, but that it doesn't matter that people know they don't believe it.
Yeah. Oh, Lord. It's sort of a doom and gloom podcast. I'm sorry. We should talk about something more fun next time because we are coming up at the 45-minute mark here. Um, Somewhat of a quickie. Well, more like 33 minutes. We got a little bit more time. Um, I'm sorry I wasn't as lively today, guys. I am a bit tired. Uh, as you can tell by my.
You can just make it up next time by doing a lot of cocaine and lifting weights before we do the next podcast.
My brain is so out of here. I don't even have a response to that. I'm just gonna be silent for like a minute and a half to process what the fuck you just said to me.
We can just end it here then. I think we covered a lot of good ground.
God, I hope so. I'm still thinking about your dual line of coke and lip weights. I feel like
Some people, not me, have said that it works
also we
really
can't.
well.
We're posting this on YouTube. We can't joke about doing coke. Okay, there are children potentially listening, and I would like to make some money off this. So let's not get me demonetized, please.
Well, giving it a name better than unnamed would definitely help you, monetize it, make it profitable.
How about I name it Fowler's Stupid Podcast? How about we do that since this was your fucking idea? Will that make you
Done.
happy?
Let's do it.
All right. That's the new name of this podcast,
You
guys.
make me happy every day.
Lord, y'all see what I have to put up with. Uh, He can't find a better co-host than me. But no, this podcast will.
Don't challenge me.
Well, the more you push me to rename this, Fowler, the less I'm gonna like try to rename it. I'm gonna, out of spite, I'm gonna continue naming it unnamed. This is being posted on my channel, so unless I give you editor's access, you can't do shit. All right, so sit down and just slow your roll. All right.
There is a cabal of women podcasters who are conspiring against the people insidiously to stop them from achieving their potential, and only I can stop this corruption from continuing.
You're gonna join the other 10 billion knuckleheads with fucking podcasts that don't say anything productive or useful. And I'll say that to their fucking faces if they come on here. All right, guys. We gotta log off. I hope you enjoyed listening to this sort of slow podcast that we kind of just filmed at 10:47 at night. We're gonna be, like I said, following the Smartmatic lawsuit and its developments, and then we'll have maybe a history podcast next time we come on, talking about some interesting historical stuff, drawing parallels from back then to today, all sorts of fun stuff. But make sure you guys hit the like button. Fowler, do you want to sign out?
Fowler out.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. They can't see the hand motion that you made because we're in a podcast format. Oh, okay. So now he's making another hand motion that y'all can't see, but would get me demonetized very, very quickly. So, and I am RDOT. I don't know if I introduced myself at the beginning. Thank you guys so much for listening, and y'all have a great rest of y'all's day, night, evening, morning, afternoon, whenever you are listening to this podcast. We will catch you guys in the next video. Thank you. Thank you.